Welcome back to another episode of Demand Gen Chat. I'm your host, Tara Robertson, and I'm really excited to introduce you to my guest for today. Today, we have a good friend of mine, Amrita. Amrita Mathur is the VP Marketing at Superside, an always on design company that delivers great design at scale. Amrita also happens to be my former boss and is an amazing SaaS marketer. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me and great to reconnect.
Really fun to reconnect with you. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your journey at Superside so far? I know there's been a ton of change in the short time you've been there.
Yeah, for sure. Oh my gosh, change doesn't even begin to describe it. When I joined Superside back in 2019, it feels like forever ago, but it was really only 3 years ago. We weren't even called Superside. We were called something else, Consist, which no one could spell. It didn't mean anything. So the first, like literally, it was like my first week, and my CEO, my boss, was like, "I think we need to rebrand and like rethink this whole like what is our go to market, what is our product, what is it that we're even selling to people." And at that point, we were strongly considering moving entirely to a subscription model, but we hadn't done it yet. Like we really had no idea what that would look like, what would the dip in revenue be like. We were very much like this, like interesting, call it like pay as you go sort of model, which obviously
Mhm.
doesn't have the same recurring revenue uh, pizzazz that comes with typical SaaS businesses. So we knew we needed to get there. And it like he was just like, okay, make it happen, figure it out. And I was just like, oh, okay, this is a big job. So we broke down the problem into like much smaller problems. It was compounded by the fact that I was also marketer number one, didn't have a team. We didn't have like our product team fully stacked up. We didn't have our engineering team fully stacked up. We barely had anybody in sales. We had no customer success. Like we had nothing. It was just like a team of like 30 people, and everyone was doing all sorts of things and wearing multiple hats. So we really had to figure out, okay, like what are the big experiments we had to figure out? And then we just went for it. So we rebranded, bought the superside.com domain, figured out what our subscription plans would be, or at least the first iteration of it. Promised ourselves that we'll just like constantly iterate on them as we learn, which we have. I think since I've been here, we've reiterated just on the pricing and the sort of SaaS packaging alone 6 times since I've been here. So that's like almost twice a year. So that's been huge. And that has directly coincided and shown incremental revenue over time. So pricing strategy is like very important, of course. So yeah, we did all of that stuff, went to market, learned a lot along the way, and really in I think 4-ish months, we kind of already saw where we had product market fit. And then again, we just like doubled down. We were like, okay, these segments get it. This is where the deal cycles are short. This is where the deal sizes are big. This is where we can go from lead to demo to closed one like really fast. And so the velocity was
Mhm.
just like so good at certain segments. We're like, that's all we're marketing to. So we just like hopped on that, and then, ran some experiments on the side, but really tried to milk that as much as possible. So it's been good. And as I was telling you earlier, like we're blessed with the fact that clearly we're solving a tangible problem. I think there's a lot of businesses, and I think there's lots of room for these types of businesses that are creating an entirely new category, solving a very poorly understood problem. But I think in our case, we're solving a problem that's somewhat known and well understood. And now we're just trying to tell people, like, hey, there's a better way to do this. You don't have to use
Mhm.
whatever slow moving, expensive agencies or poorly managed freelancer marketplaces. Here's like the third, fourth alternative and a better way of doing it. So that's easier. In some ways, it's easier to go to market. It's saturated and you have quote unquote competition, but the problem's understood. So we're blessed with that. We're blessed with a huge TAM, a huge market, and I think like we're at a, you know, I would say there's definitely been like a shift in the thinking of companies all over the world, regardless of the vertical that they're in or the industry that you're in. I think everybody generally kind of understands that design is important. It's not just like making things pretty anymore. I think people get that. So we don't have to do that level of education. I think if this was like 5, 6 years ago, we'd still be educating people of why design is important, why you need to be design led, and all of that stuff. But like Nike and the Mints of the world have solved that for us. So we're a little bit right place, right time.
That's awesome. And With all those changes, especially on the go-to-market and pricing side, have the KPIs for your team changed along with that, or have you always just been focused on pipeline and inbound revenue?
Yeah, good question. I, you know, I kind of, there's definitely issues with the OKR model, but I think what I love about it is that it allows teams to keep like a couple of important things constant. Like we'll always be
Mhm,
measured and always be focused on pipeline and revenue, right? Like marketing's 100% focused on ARR. Like we have a $75 million number, we're going to try to hit that. That's it. But every quarter we try to keep our eye on certain things that are very important, perhaps that particular quarter. Doesn't mean we change it every quarter, but it's just like a revolving door of like, let's just call them leading indicators. So they're metrics
mhm,
that are important to hitting that 75 million. Um, but it may not always be important to keep your eye on it because maybe you've solved that problem and now you can go on to other problems. So I'll give you a couple of examples. Number one, bringing existing leads back into the fold. So, like that repeat visitor, that repeat engagement is very important to us because we know we've seen now that more repeat engagement with us leads to pipeline much faster. So like we already have whatever 30, 40,000 people in our system that have come to Superside, filled out a form at some point. We know who they are, we're tracking them. And now I need to find a way to like bring them back and engage them further. We're super focused on the last couple of quarters on what we just called mix of leads. And that's because we've
mhm,
seen that certain segments have higher correlation to better retention. So for us, mid-market and the smaller enterprise companies are really important. We have amazing retention with them. If you're really, really big, like really gigantic and massive, like a Fortune 2000, maybe not so much. But if you're mid-market, like a Chili Piper or a little bit bigger, like maybe like early days of Facebook, or we have a ton of customers who are like just kind of like have employees that are like maybe 2,000 people. They're a really great fit for us. So now that we know that retention's great with that group, marketing is hyper focused on bringing in those types of leads. It may be lower
mm,
quantity, but we see them as higher quality over time. So yeah, that we keep an eye on these days, and we also keep an eye on just sort of customer engagement by our community and all the community activities that we do. There's a couple of
mhm,
other leading indicators in there, but my point is, I don't think that any company, ourselves included, should be so buried in the numbers that you lose sight of like the bigger things. I think it's important that you pick your battles, and our battles basically change every quarter or so. That's really
mhm.
our philosophy, and I like that about the OKR model. I'd say like most importantly, some people are really not great with change, right? And so when you give people
Yeah.
advance warning, like, hey, this is what's important right now, but it may not be important later because you've solved that problem. I think it just allows marketers to be comfortable with that.
Mhm.
So yeah, we try to do some like planning and team building every quarter and roll that in there.
And how do you do that remotely? Because that's one thing just personally we're struggling with, as we've always been remote first as well, but trying to do things like plan for the next year or the next quarter. I just love doing that stuff in person. So, is there anything you guys are doing to get that done remotely or
Oh gosh, honestly, there's no magic number, there's no magic way
Mhm.
or tools, or lots of people will be like, oh, we use this sticky notes app or whatever, and it's like, yeah, sure, like that's fine. I
Mhm.
think it kind of, the thing that's there's definitely things that don't work for us. So I don't think we've figured it out, but what's worked for us is that we have like a culture of making decisions locally. So we're
Mhm.
very I'd say like consensus driven. So what we actually end up doing is we tell each of the squads in marketing that these are like, this is what's important to the business. And then each squad
Mhm.
actually does their own planning and they surface up they should be focused on. We do debate it. Like there is like some poking and prodding that happens, and we're just like, oh, what about this and what about that? And we kind of have that back and forth. And that back and forth is actually in a public forum. So it could be like a team wide meeting or some kind of ritual. But
Mhm.
it's quite public so that everybody has a chance to weigh in. And then we try to ensure that there's alignment across all the squads. I think the the philosophy that I subscribe to. Like squads for me are everybody has a swim lane. You have your specific KRs, but they need to be aligned across the entire team. And they need to be extremely flexible and collaborative. So even though you can have your own swim lane and you know exactly what you're executing on and what needle you're trying to move, you it has to have alignment. So it's not worked perfectly, I would say, and it does take. I'd say by the time we finish our planning process, it's usually like this when we planned for 2022, that was like all of January, basically. There was tons of back and forth. But once that larger plan is set, the quarterly planning is a lot easier because it's usually just adjustments and tweaks, and we can usually wrap it up in a week. That's how it's played out. But because of this, like make decisions locally framework that we operate under, it's not horrible. I think it's harder for companies where everybody has to be involved in everything. There's definitely lots of companies like that. I was just reading on Twitter like last night where this lady I follow is interviewing at this company and she has like 9 people that she's interviewing with because they're just like a very consensus driven org or whatever it is, and it's just like, oh gosh, yeah. And like how you make decisions in organizations like that, I can't even fathom.
Yeah, that gives you a preview of how they work internally, so maybe that's not a great not a great sign if you don't like that kind of culture. On the topic of planning, one post of yours that I really wanted to touch on is you had a LinkedIn post around I think you just say it COMO, like FOMO, but cost of missing out. So I'm curious how that factors in. Maybe you could quickly describe what cost of missing out is, and then also how that factors into your planning.
Yeah. So cost of missing out is just a random term I made up. It's a way to think about marketing activities. Like everybody says no to stuff, right? You can't do everything. You can't even if you had unlimited budget and resources, you just can't possibly do everything. So cost of missing out is just like a way to think about are these opportunities things that maybe may not exist later for whatever reason, maybe increased competition, reduction in budget, whatever, like there's all these various factors. So now that we're in a place where we have the machine built, we have a predictable way of bringing in leads, bringing in pipeline. I mean, there's tweaks to be done, but like the bulk of the machine is built. And just for context, like we're 100% inbound, like at Superside. So everything that sales touches has been produced by marketing. It's not like sales has its own revenue target and marketing does. So if we fail, sales fails, customer success fails, right? So it's a train. So we had to be very careful that if we are going to start doing risky things, that it did derail the machine that was built. So in my mind, because we've been so focused on that and because everything's so supremely interconnected, I personally did not want to do anything that was, let's just say, not properly trackable, didn't have a straight line to revenue, etc. Long story short, I describe Como as um, let's just say risky moonshots that could be high reward. Of course, they're high risk, but they could be high reward. And it's just, again, activities or initiatives that may not have a straight line to revenue. And I think every marketer has a responsibility to try that at some point in their company's journey. Somebody actually on that LinkedIn post made a very good point. She said, um, this is a true sign of a organization growing up, which I think is so smart because obviously if you're an early stage startup, you can't afford to do that. But when you're in that high growth phase and you've got the machine built, then there is an optimal time to start moving in that direction. So this is that time for us. We have decided to do a lot of high spend type things. I'll give you 2 examples. This is not locked in, but we're considering strongly being at SaaStr Annual, the conference this year. You can easily blow 250K and get nothing in return. You don't really know if like your audience is going to be there, how they're going to react. There's like a bunch of stuff that, is like out there. But we figured, okay, if there is a time to try it, this is a year to try it, right? So it's high risk, could be high reward. We're launching this huge campaign in Q3, and we're thinking of number one, entering new markets like geographically, which we've never done before. We've been so supremely focused on just America, but now we're thinking, oh, Germany, oh, UK. So there's that, and then we're also thinking of actually doing some out of home advertising. We're like extremely digital. We've never done anything in person. So both SaaS annual and like out of home advertising will be like something we've literally never tried before and have no idea how it's going to do. And again, it's something that's like big bucks. You can spend a lot of money very quickly. The way that I've thought about de-risking that is ensuring that we have evidence that those things could work in advance of pulling the trigger on that. So that includes, hey, do we have hero customers in the UK and Germany? Do we have anybody? Who are they? Are they just like random one-offs, or like is there some consistent thing that we've seen from those markets? So just like, trying to take an evidence-based approach, but still taking that moonshot and being okay if it doesn't work, and not having to explain to the org like, well, this is why we blew $250,000.
Yeah, I think that's the hardest part, especially to your point with an inbound business is you don't wanna screw over the sales team and the customer facing teams by taking this risk, but you're in a good spot with all of your other programs, so it's the perfect time, and there might not be another time where you're having a great quarter and you can commit to these things, so
Exactly, exactly. And there's like also like there's just you can't anticipate competition. Like what if random other companies come out of the woodworks that are copycats of ours? Like we literally see
Mhm.
companies that don't have the exact model, but they've stolen our like our messaging from our homepage, even our brand, like our whole space theme. Like literally companies have ripped that off. And so at the back of my mind, I always have like someone's just gonna come out of the woodworks one day and say, I'm gonna do Superside, but only target the UK or whatever. So yeah, just
Yeah.
just that's what Como is, and it's not applicable to all startups. It's you have to do it when you're ready and when you have money in the bank, I think.
Yeah. You mentioned that you're pretty much 100% digital today. I know at least I've seen a bunch of your retargeting ads that I love, but one, I forget what you call him. Is it Space Dog? What's your dog? Astro. Yeah. I wrote Space Dog because that was smart. Um, but that's probably the number one ad I've seen on Facebook with so many positive comments, especially Facebook can be very kind of a dark place sometimes. But I came across it just the other day. It has hundreds of comments and they're all, wow, this is the best ad I've ever seen. This really stands out. I'd love to hear a little bit just kind of how, if you can share how that's performing and how that came together, because I'll have to share a screenshot when we share out this episode because it's really cool.
So yeah, it's been one of our highest performing ads of all time. In general, I'll just say that ads with motion do extremely well. It's kind of again, it's one of those things. Like, of course, it does better because they're more engaging, duh. But I have seen some shitty motion ads too. Like they could be like very
Yeah.
jarring and over the top. So there is like a certain I guess, way to do it. But yeah, our head of performance marketing, smart dude, really creative actually. He wanted to do an ad that obviously utilized motion because we'd seen positive momentum there, but he wanted to like do something that broke like the grid and would take you out of like as you're scrolling, which many people just kind of like scroll really fast. As you're scrolling, it like kind of like jumps out at you. And so with that challenge in mind, and by the way, we had another piece of evidence which we knew that everybody loved Astropup, like from the website, because he's featured on the website, he's on the book a demo page, he's on a lot of different pages. So we already knew
So you
that
knew that he worked as a
we knew he
concept.
worked. Yeah, we knew that character, that illustration worked, and we knew motion worked. So how do you now combine that, right? So then we just ran a bunch of in the background, like we just created a bunch of different examples of ads that broke the grid and utilized these two things. We, I'll talk about this more in a second, but we have a creative process that we utilize to come up with really innovative ads. But yeah, we just created a bunch of them, and honestly, I think Andy, who runs this, picked like what he thought was the best one. He has very good hunches too, because he's just all into this. And it worked. It really worked. And we got early evidence of it from the comments. And then we knew that when people make a lot of comments, even if they're negative, we know that the distribution of that will be much better. So when
Yeah.
we saw that early indicator, we just kept running it for a couple of weeks, and then it just became our high performing ad. So yeah,
That's so neat.
yeah, and
Yeah,
we
I
have
love
other motion ads that also do almost equally well that don't have any of these like let's just call them like Facebook, break the grid tactics. But
Mhm.
yeah, this one has I'd say this is one of our maybe top 3 or top 4 ads in the last 2 years.
Wow, that's great. And when you come across an insight like that, How do you share that across your customers? Is it obviously you put out content on your blog, but do you also empower your CS team to share this kind of thing with customers? Or how is that process?
Yeah, we do. So yeah, we put out our own content, share with the world like what we're where we're finding success, etc. Um, our customer success team has a process through which they share all sorts of insights. Or, so we have customers that use us almost exclusively for ad creative, for example. That would be the most direct application of an insight like this, right? But I would say that not everybody cares. Not all of our customers would care about this. We have, I think, one of the problems, it's not a problem really, but one of the issues that our customer success deals with is that we have a lot of different buyer personas and a lot of different user personas, and not everybody cares about the same things. So, hypothetically, if you're on a subscription plan with Superside that does not include ad creative, you're really not going to care about this one little detail or insight. Um, so yeah, the customer success team like arms the right customers with whatever they find out. It could be from a report that's publicly published. It could be something that's worked for us. It could just be another insight that they themselves can see from the creative that we've produced for them. So there's like that bi-directional feedback that happens. We've actually hired, but this is part of our secret sauce, but we've hired marketers on the customer success team that act as floating advisors for our customers. So they'll just jump in to random conversations. It could be, hey, I'm on the monthly call, the customer success person's on the monthly call with the customer. And they might just say, hey, these are the things, this is on the agenda. And that marketer will say, oh, I have value to add here, here, and here. I'm going to join your call. So we've got a few of these people just like floating around trying to add value wherever. And there's no like charge for it. It's just like, hey, have you thought about Pinterest? I think you guys would do great on Pinterest. Here's why. And then, we'll come up with some examples. And then the customer has a chance to be like, yay or nay, use Superside or don't use Superside, etc.
That's a really great value add because obviously they're already using Superside anyway. So if you can get them to try a different channel or try a different tactic, that's great, kind of a win-win. So
Yeah, it's a great win-win because often they'll say, yep, let's do it. And we'll use Superside for it.
that's really cool. You mentioned your design process that you follow internally. I'd love to hear a little bit about that and how you approach things like A/B testing as well.
So I think let me just give the backdrop. So we've got our own creative team on the marketing team, but we're also on a superside plan, obviously, because there's like a million things to do. Uh, what we've done, and I think again in retrospect, I should have done this at all the companies I've ever been at, but I guess I've never really had the creative team report to me until this job. But what we've done, so we've got a whole host of people on the team. We've got video people, we've got classic designers and illustrators, we've got web and UI people, different skill sets essentially. But we have assigned one or more people to specific squads. So our squad structure is we've got performance, SEO, influencer, all this super experimental stuff under one person. We've got demand gen and ABM under one person. We've got content marketing under one person. We've got product marketing under one person. Those are the four squads. And then, of course, the creative team supports all of these guys. What we've done is we've said, hey, you two designers with these skill sets, you are largely aligned with this squad. So there's like very tight knit discussions and processes and data sharing that happens. This is particularly important for performance marketing, where tons of experimentation happens on a weekly basis. We ship an experiment basically every week, sometimes more than one. And so that designer who does all of our motion ads, for example, is very um in the know of what's working and what's not, like about the most like nitty-gritty. Like you can't even imagine. Like they talk about shape of the button, color. Like Astropop is like an example of like one large thing that came out of it, but I'm talking like really detailed stuff because they'll run experiments that are so subtle they as a user you won't even necessarily see the difference. It could be a small change in the copy. It could be a tiny difference in the size of the button is like, download here or click here. But that designer is fully in the know and he joins all of the weekly performance marketing meetings. So even though his skill set is design and illustration and motion, um, he's sitting with the guys who are like clicking the buttons and making the decisions on the tests that are being run. So that
Right.
actual process has been great. Our experimentation process is like number one, like there's lots of rules of thumb. This is kind of standard, but it's the usual stuff where we say you got to ship fast, got to run a lot of experiments, follow your gut, obviously, to figure out what the experiment should be, but then rely on the data to actually make the call. And then we also know that it's not just the ad that does the work, right? Like it has to have continuity. So the landing page is equally important. So we run lots of experiments there as well.
Mm. And where does copy come in? Because that's something that happens a lot when I work with designers is some of them prefer to start kind of with you and some want you to hand them copy and then they work from there.
Great point. So we write our own copy, like the marketer writes their own copy. But to
Mm.
make things simpler, we actually innovate more on the design aspects and less on the copy. Because we've got our standard messages. We know that they
Yeah.
work. They worked across other channels, whether it's the website or what have you. So we already know, like, hey, these are the 3 or 4 things that constantly work. Prospect love it. They get it. This is a good way to like quickly shift someone's mind from this to this or what have you. So we kind of don't
Mm.
stray from that too much. The specific copy might change, but the message doesn't change. And of course, the performance marketers have full leeway on that. Sometimes they'll run it by the team. They'll be like, "Hey, we're trying something new. Does this sound right? Does this look good?" And then the team will provide feedback. But they have like a pretty buttoned down process. But we're very I would say like concept led. Like we'll come up with these are the 3 concepts this quarter, and then the designers actually go off and produce stuff without even seeing a copy necessarily. I actually think for ads
Cool.
that's better. It's not great for landing pages, but it's a great process for advertising specifically.
Yeah, especially if something like a Facebook or a social ad, that's what's getting people's attention. It's normally the copy kind of blends into the background. Like I couldn't tell I normally am someone who focuses on copy, but I couldn't tell you what the Astropup copy was. I just remember Astropup. So that's a great point. Yeah, start with the concept.
And it's funny because I have this debate with people all the time is like, you know, back in the maybe even now actually, but like the typical creative agency or ad agency, they always pair you up. Like if you were a customer of an agency like that, they'll give you a designer and a copywriter. And I actually
Mhm.
can't fathom how that could possibly work. Like I just don't understand what that trio would do. Like so you have a performance marketer and a designer and a copywriter. Like shouldn't the performance marketer generally be able to write half decent copy and know enough about design. I just don't think that that's 3 different bodies. I think today it's like one person with a lot of help from a creative person.
Yeah, maybe you need a copy editor, but hopefully the person internally knows enough about the product to write that copy.
Exactly, and your message and, who your buyer personas are. Yeah, it seems
Yeah.
silly to me that it would be, like, different people. You asked about A/B testing. So, like I said, we ship an experiment every week, sometimes more than 1 experiment a week. For us to get statistical significance, like, we know that sometimes it's hard to get data back in just 1 week, depending on the
Mhm.
segment that we're going after. So, some experiments are quite long and some are, like, fairly short, depending on which group it is. When we market, let's just say like some kind of top of funnel content download asset that we and given what the asset is, we know tons of people could see it and tons of different people could react to it. And by the way, there's like 5 or 6 different buyer personas that might download it. So when the results start coming in, we always have to keep in the back of our mind that it could be one segment that loves it and one segment that hates it. So not to take the results as gospel. So that context setting is really
Mm.
important. And we try to maintain like our own documentation. We'll say, hey, we're running this experiment. This is our expectation. This is what the data suggests. We are going to discount this data because of blah blah and blah. And um, keeping that documentation for yourself and being true to what your experiment actually was is super helpful because you forget. Like 1 month down the line, you just ran like 12 experiments. You've forgotten. So that I think that
Yeah.
framework is very important for people to have.
Yeah, especially to your point, if you're targeting multiple personas with the same creative, same landing page, you need to keep that context documented somewhere, however you do it. But yeah, makes sense.
And you can't separate them out because you may just not have enough people matching in your
Mhm.
Facebook ad campaign.
Great. I know we're coming up on time. I do have a couple quick fire round questions for you before you go. So first, is there another marketer you follow that our listeners should go follow? Maybe it's someone with a podcast or a blog. newsletter, anything?
There's tons. I'm so bad with names, so I actually never remember her name, but she writes about sort of like user for like buyer psychology. Caitlin, I think Bourgoin or Bourgoin. I really don't. Anyway, she's like an independent marketer. She runs this like
Mhm.
sort of like I guess like sort of like a consulting agency sort of thing. But I've subscribed to her emails, and every week or so she sends something out, but it's very like very much about how people think. And
Mhm.
so many people have made this point that, well, marketing is mainly just like buyer psychology, which I think can be true. It isn't just that, but it can be true. But it definitely brings me closer to that. I think like that's the one area that I'm personally a little bit weak on. And yeah, she's always educating, or at least like making you think differently.
And what's an under the radar channel or tactic that your team is really loving right now?
Ooh, I don't know if it's under the radar, but given that we're like a design company, we're obviously
Mhm.
like our big highest performing channel is Instagram, for example. People have suggested that it could be Behance or Dribble. I don't think that's true for us because it tends to attract a lot of independent designers, whereas we're B2B, right? Actually, we're more
Mhm.
like
Yeah.
B2E. And so those people aren't hanging out. The head of creative at Airbnb is not hanging out on Behance and Dribble. He might be, but he's looking mainly for designers to join his team. His frame of
Mhm.
his frame of mind is quite different. So we've actually found great success with Instagram, both in terms of organic and paid. It's done beautifully for us. And we're starting to experiment a ton with YouTube. I actually think that for B2B, YouTube could be huge. It's very hard to produce good YouTube content. Obviously, that's why a lot of companies don't
Mhm.
do it. But when we've invested huge resources into that area, and it's actually great for SEO. And there's a ton of white space to
Mhm.
exploit there. So, yeah, that's something that B2B marketers can sort of start paying attention to if they haven't already.
Yeah, those are 2 good ones. You're right, you need that video resource though, because it's tough to produce something solid. Yeah, for sure.
We just like found this like unicorn guy who can write, edit, and he can be on screen talent, which is the hardest part in some ways. Like,
Mm.
how do you find somebody who knows the the subject matter and is good enough to be on camera? Like I would hate to be on it would take multiple takes for me to produce a good YouTube video. So yeah, I think you almost need like a team if you're going to invest in YouTube. You need like at least two or three people: a great editor, a great on-screen talent, and someone who can obviously write the scripts.
Great, and lastly, where can we go to find out more about you? What channel are you most active on?
Ooh, I'd say like quite active on Twitter and LinkedIn. Amrita Mathur on all of these channels, and my DMs are open, and I try to help out where I can.
Great, we'll drop those links for our audience as well. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. Really appreciate the chat.
Awesome. Thanks, Tara.
Thanks everyone for joining this episode of Demand Gen Chat. We'll see you in a couple weeks for our next episode.